Amazing. Good afternoon and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to our virtual panel, Digital Art in the 21st Century, Art, Law, and NFTs. My name is Kenza Tahri, and this is an event co-hosted by the McGill Art Law Association and the Cheng Art and Culture Association. NFTs have received immense media attention since their arrival, with the Collins Dictionary even naming NFT the word of the year of 2021. While it is clear that NFTs create new opportunities for artists and patrons, we have yet to see exactly how this role will play out in art market circuits of exchange. Notably, NFTs have caused conundrums in the legal context, since the implications of this new kind of intellectual property for copyright, trademark, and patent law remain unclear. So to answer some of the questions spurred by this novel blockchain technology, we've invited digital art, copyright law, and NFT experts to the panel with us this afternoon. First, joining us from Buffalo, New York, we have Dr. Tina Rivers-Ryan, an art historian and curator specializing in media art. Her experience and expertise spans video, digital, and internet art. Among her 5 degrees in art history include a BA from Harvard and a PhD from Columbia. And informed by her own experience of disability, her research generally seeks to highlight the relationship between technology and the body. Throughout her career, she has worked with the Met, the MoMA, and Artforum. She is currently the Assistant Curator at the Albright-Knox Art Gallery in Buffalo, New York, where she put on the major Fall 2021 survey, Difference, Machines, Technology, and Identity in Contemporary Art. Next, we have Eliane Elbogen joining us from Montreal, an intellectual property lawyer at Fasken and a legal expert in patent, trademark, and copyright law, and trade secret matters. She has extensive expertise litigating intellectual property cases and overseeing the IP dimensions of transactions. She's especially interested in the legal issues at the forefront of technological development, including artificial intelligence and biotechnology. Prior to practicing law, she was the artistic director and co-founder of the Eastern Bloc, a digital art exhibition center based in Montreal. She holds an LLB with honors from the University of Quebec at Montréal and a bachelor's in art history, criticism, and conservation from McGill. Joining us from Montreal as well, we have finally NFT artist Alexis Prefontaine, alias Aifura, a self-taught digital artist, graphic designer, and photographer from Montreal. His dreamlike digital landscape and portraiture works showcase a captivating surrealist style which foreground color, balance, and emotion, the 3 elements at the heart of his artistic practice. His side project, Aefaro, is an experiment with color and photography. He has collaborated with multidisciplinary artists around the world, including Vakoja Paris and Safe Haven. Alexis Prefontaine holds a bachelor's degree in graphic design from the Université de Québec à Montréal. Thank you very much indeed to all of you for joining us on the panel this afternoon, and to all our wonderful participants for coming out for this event. My first question is directed to Eliane Elbogen. There has been a lot of talk about NFTs, as we all know, but what exactly are NFTs and why have they become so popular in the art world specifically?
Okay, well, I guess that's a good place as I need to start right now in a discussion on NFTs. So basically, if we go down to basics, an analogy that I like to use for what an NFT is basically a certificate that stands in for an object that you've purchased. So if, let's say, you buy a house, there's a deed of sale that comes along with that house, and that's a document that certifies or that attests to the transaction that you've done with, that you've gone through. So you've purchased this house and now you're the owner of the house. So an NFT is a digital representation of either another digital asset. Could be an image, could be a video, a song, some kind of file that lives in the digital world. It could also represent a physical asset. So NFTs can stand in for sports cards, wine, fashion, high luxury fashion items. So basically something that has value in the real world and then gets transposed into the digital world. On a technical side, it's code. It's essentially computer code. It's a string of I guess you would call it like a digital signature or a digital imprint. It's a hash, so it's an alphanumerical code that points to that can redirect you to the actual asset, whether it's a digital file or one step removed, a file that represents a physical object in the real world. And so the NFT is not the work itself, is not the artwork itself. It merely points to or references that work. And there was a second part to the question, wasn't there? Why are they so popular, or what?
Yes, so why have they become so popular in the art world? Because as you've just implied, an NFT doesn't necessarily have to represent only art. And why have they become so prolific for art specifically and not as much in other places for the moment?
So from my perspective, I'm not sure that I'm necessarily the best person on this panel to answer that question, but what I've seen is there's like this new possibility for artists, for digital artists, to monetize their work. And so what the NFT allows you to do, because it lives on the blockchain, which is a public distributed ledger. I'm going to, use words that maybe don't mean anything, but it's essentially an open database on the internet that anybody can access. And it records transactions. It records transactions in time. And because of the way the blockchain works, those transactions are verified by a community of people. And so they're deemed to be true or authentic transactions. And so what's interesting about NFTs and why they've gained traction in the art world is because of the way blockchain technology works and smart contracts particularly, and I imagine we'll get into this a little bit later, you can build in a resale right or a droit de suite into the smart contract that forms the basis of the transaction when an NFT changes hands from one person to another. And so every time the NFT that represents the underlying art asset changes hands, and automatically a certain percentage of that sale is redirected back to the artist, which is pretty revolutionary for the art market, especially in the digital realm, because this resale right doesn't necessarily or doesn't automatically exist or isn't even recognized, for example, in Canada or the United States. But I imagine maybe Tina has some more insight as to why they're so popular in the art market today.
Sure, I'm happy to jump in. I just want to add my own 2 cents into answer that first question, though. So one thing I just want to clarify is that while I agree that we can think of the NFT as a kind of certificate or perhaps token that stands in for a digital asset, we should be careful because, in fact, it's not actually a legal title. It's also unlike a deed to a house, for example. The NFT very rarely actually confers ownership over the associated asset to the purchaser of the NFT. So essentially all you're acquiring is a token that proves that you own the token. So for example, in the traditional art world, when let's say a collector or a museum acquires a work of art, what that means is not that they acquire the copyright to the intellectual property represented in the artwork, that always remains with the artist. But what we do acquire is the physical control, possession, ownership over the work, and also certain rights that come with that, like the right of exhibition, for example. And these rights are always spelled out in contracts that are negotiated between artists, collectors, perhaps the artist gallerists. So with the NFT, it's possible if you write your own smart contract that you can actually confer legal ownership over the associated digital asset. However, that is actually not the standard. So in most cases, if you acquire an NFT on one of the major exchanges that allow artists to mint or create NFTs and associate them with their work of art, according to the terms and conditions of those exchanges, you actually have no ownership claim at all over the associated asset. All you are buying is a token that is supposed to be the only token on the blockchain that points to that asset. Now, of course, anybody else could go make a token that points to the exact same JPEG file. So it's a space that basically has to self-police, and there's rampant fraud right now. So just wanted to clarify one thing about that, right? So like the token doesn't transfer the intellectual property of the associated asset, nor does it necessarily transfer title, like the ownership over that asset. So in fact, in a lot of these exchanges, it actually stipulates that the artist who sells the work on the exchange with an NFT retains the right to turn around and sell that work to somebody else, as long as they do it off chain, right? They want the idea, you know, they want their own to only be one NFT, because the whole point of the NFT is creating artificial scarcity. And then one other thing I just wanted to say about the resale rights is that the resale rights, and Eliana, you can jump in if I'm sort of, you know, I'm not understanding something or we have a different understanding, but my understanding is that the resale rights are actually not encoded in the smart contract. So for example, the contract that's most commonly used on the blockchain Ethereum, which is the most popular blockchain for making and selling NFTs. There are many different blockchains. Blockchain is a kind of technology, but it manifests in different chains. Ethereum is one, Bitcoin is another, Tezos is another. So the Ethereum one is the most popular, and the most popular sort of way of making an NFT is using something called ERC 721. And at this point, there's actually no way to make the resale rights or the droit de suite encoded into that. So the resale rights actually exist only at the level of the exchange or the platform on which the work is minted. So in much the same way that if you buy something online on like Amazon, at least in the States, Amazon automatically adds a sales tax onto that transaction. The platform is what is sort of triggering the taking of the royalty, which is usually like 10% on most of these exchanges. And so the platform itself or the exchange is what is making that royalty happen. But if you were to take your NFT from that exchange and go list it on another, that royalty would no longer be in effect. So, and there have been a lot of conversations about creating new contracts that would actually make royalties permanent and sort of baked into the NFT itself. But at this point, for most NFTs, that's actually not quite how it works. That said, in terms of its why NFTs are attractive to artists, part of it is because, first of all, when you sell an NFT, you instantly get paid. So compared to transactions where you're selling works perhaps through a gallery, you might wait weeks, if not months, to get paid for that work. So it's an instantaneous transaction, and the transaction actually cannot be executed without automatically deducting and transferring money between blockchain wallets. The resale rights, of course, are an amazing thing. I'm a big supporter of resale rights. So it's amazing that they do exist, however limited they might be. Other advantages, it allows artists to tap into a new collector base. So people who invested early in cryptocurrency are sitting on a big pile of money, or money is not exactly the right word for it. They're sitting on a big pile of digital assets that's treated as an ersatz currency. And so it allows people to make money by selling NFTs to these people, because a lot of these people, they don't want to, or at least until recently, when the market crashed last week, they didn't want to take their money out of the cryptocurrency ecosystem, but there's not a whole lot to do with it. There's not a whole lot of things that you could spend money on. What can you do? Well, you can buy NFTs. That's one use case for cryptocurrency, and it's fun. And it's sort of like, you go to these auctions and they're sort of addictive. And there's also like gambling, because you're hoping to see that the work that you bought will suddenly appreciate in value. So I think that that's a big motivator. I will say that historically, we have never needed NFTs to buy and sell digital art. Artists have been buying and selling websites, for example, since the 1990s. Using a traditional certificate of authenticity and regular currency. So it's always been possible. It's just that there's never really been an appetite. There's never really been a market for it, especially amongst traditional art collectors who perhaps couldn't wrap their head around the idea of artificial scarcity. Although that said, photography and conceptual art have both, and video art, have both enjoyed pretty robust markets in the past 30 years. And again, that is only sustained through a certificate of authenticity, right? Like, how do we sell a conceptual work of art? It's with a certificate. And so digital art always could have been bought and sold the same way.
Indeed, the legalities of NFTs still remain very murky and debated and controversial. But on this note of how digital art has been sold before NFTs versus after, from an artist's perspective, it is important, of course, to recognize the historical relevance of the digital art community that existed before the NFT explosion. Could you tell us a little bit about the dominant features of digital art before the onset of NFTs and how this ecosystem has evolved and been changed by the emergence of NFTs?
Yeah, so, well, I've been doing digital art for about like 6 or 7 years. So I kind of started in 2014, but kind of got more serious with it around like 2016. And I started doing 3D in 2017. Since before NFTs, how I would make revenue as a digital artist was mostly through commissions and client work, because as far as my personal work would go, the only way I would monetize that would be like through licensing. Like, let's say a customer would like license a piece that I've already made in the past, let's say non-exclusive or exclusive, perpetual or whatever, and prints. I would sell a bunch of prints sometimes here and there, but like it was maybe just enough to pay like a Netflix subscriptions per month, and so wasn't anything substantial. So as a digital artist, as I said, client work and commissions, that was most of my income. And NFTs for me, and I'm just speaking for myself here, kind of changed that that income for me. So because of NFTs now, I can work on my personal stuff and bring my own vision to life and sell those pieces to people who want to collect my work. As before, most of my income and my living would come from me working for someone else to bring their own vision to life through, I don't know, music visuals, concert visuals, and all that stuff. So I don't know, like I haven't been able to sell like my digital art per se before, like even though it could have been possible with certificates. I think there might have been like a smaller demand for that in the past, and now that NFTs kind of enable a market of these things and digital assets, there's more demand now, so it makes more sense that now I can do that. So yeah, I don't know if it's like clear or whatever, but it's kind of how it changed it for me. Kind of went from just doing regular commissions to actually creating art for myself and being able to monetize that and make a living off of it.
What is the demographic of the people who buy your art? Do you know them personally? Are they, anonymous usernames on the internet? And what do you think are their motivations for buying your pieces?
The range is very, very wide. Like it's kind of hard to tell exactly, because on some platforms, as an example, I sold some open editions on Nifty Gateway, which is like a centralized platform that kind of onboards new users to buy and trade NFTs. And on that platform, I have quite a bunch of collectors, but I cannot really know who they are because there's not necessarily a social profile associated to each Nifty Gateway profile. But as far as unique editions go, whenever I sold like a unique NFT of one of my works to a collector, then I would say that in general, most of the collectors are people who are like kind of into crypto and all that, and who have been in this space for a few years already. That's the majority of them. So these people are used to crypto markets. They're like kind of like the most open people to NFTs, and they kind of understood it before anyone else. And so it makes sense to me that it kind of is like that for now. But I kind of have other people who collected my work who were like as new as I was when I entered the space in 2020. People who were just like huge fans of digital art. And for them, the idea of being able to own a token that kind of acts as a certificate for that digital asset was very appealing for them. And so that's why they started collecting work, because they wanted to support also the artists that they like. Before it was not as possible, except for buying a print or maybe commissioning them directly, but that's another story. So yeah, I would say that it greatly depends, and the demographic is getting quite larger by the day because of the mainstream, because NFTs are now more mainstream and more adopted. So yeah.
Thank you very much. I would like to ask all of you, beginning with Elian, if you could describe in a few sentences what, in your opinion, is the biggest misconception about NFTs.
Probably, and I don't want to say if the analogy that I used for the deed of sale was confusing or led to believe that, I agree completely with what Tina was saying, that, I mean, there's no point of contention on that. The NFT does not give you any rights to ownership of the work or any rights in the intellectual property of the underlying asset, unless a smart contract says otherwise. But yes, that's the standard. So I would say that is probably the biggest misconception. I mean, we're still hearing, I think it came out in the news last week that some people had bought the NFT to the Dune script, and they thought that they were buying the copyright in the work itself. So they spent $3 million on that. So if people are still have this in mind, and that's probably still a misconception, even though I think it's more or less starting to get dispelled now. But I think people have a really hard time wrapping their mind around this idea that you're buying something for whatever amount of money, big or small, that is linked to the work, but actually disconnected from it, in the sense that it's just this, perhaps like a better analogy is like a code to enter a house. Like you rent a house on Airbnb, okay, and you don't own that house, but you have a passcode to enter into it, and then you're selling that code to then other people and so on and so forth. I mean, there's no like clear sort of direct analogy in the real world, but it's sort of like, I think it is difficult to wrap your head around this idea that you're buying something that is meant to stand in for something else, and ultimately doesn't really give you rights to that thing that it's standing in for.
Elian, have you heard people talk about these as being like star registries? I think that's the closest analogy, because even when people call them about Beanie Babies, it's like, well, Beanie Baby is still a physical thing, like it's still a physically scarce thing. But the idea of a star registry, where you pay a company a certain amount of money to write down in their private database that you own that star in the night sky. Like you don't own that star in any sense, right? Like you have no ownership claim. Anybody else can go look at that star. But it's just that within this particular environment of this database, there's a record that says that you own that star and that nobody else does. And that's it. Yeah,
and as long as there's consensus in that community that database, that registry is the only registry that counts, then there's consensus that has value to it.
Yeah. Your thoughts on the biggest misconception about NFTs, Dr. Ryan?
Well, in addition to that one about what exactly, the NFT is and does, and, the idea that the NFT actually is the work of art itself, which, everything we're saying here has to be clarified, right? So as Elian was just saying, it is the case that you can confer ownership rights with some NFTs. You just have to actually write it that way. And similarly, it is the case that sometimes NFTs are works of art. There are conceptual blockchain artists who are actually making works of art using the smart contract itself as a kind of medium. So when I say medium, what I mean is sort of the artist materials, right? Which can be physical, but also conceptual. So, I think of the artist Ria Myers, for example, who's like basically one of the first people to make NFTs, who actually makes work that is about and exists in the medium of the smart contract. But for most people, that is not the case, right? Most people are just sort of using the NFT to tokenize or monetize a JPEG file or something like that exists outside of the context of the blockchain. But anyway, I think for me, what I would add then as a common misconception is the idea that NFTs equals digital art. As a historian of digital art, I can say that, as Alexi was also, explaining, digital art is something that has existed since long before NFTs were created. In fact, digital art first emerged in the 1960s. The first computer art contest was in 1962 or 3. So digital art is a very long practice. At this point, it's half a century old, 50 years old, 60 years old. And it takes many formats. It can look like websites, it can look like software programs, it can look like online-based interactive games. It can take the form of prints made by a computer program outputting to a plotter printer or a 3D printer. It can look like, lots of different things. So the idea that digital art has only existed for about 18 months or that, and in fact, NFTs themselves have existed since 2014, depending on exactly how you define them. So it's almost a decade old. But yeah, there's a much bigger, vaster terrain of practice, and that a lot of digital art actually is participatory, is interactive. That was one of the appeals of working with digital technologies for a lot of artists back in the 1980s and 1990s. It was the fact that it afforded them a method for not creating discrete objects, but creating experiences or environments that were really open and open-ended systems and sort of participatory, and allowed people to collaborate in a sort of really interesting way. So very much opposed to the sort of bourgeois market-focused commodity object idea about what art can be. And so there's a real radical potential there. And weirdly, the thing about NFTs is it's actually, as I've sort of, argued for, a little bit now, is that it's actually reinscribing digital art within the object-based bourgeois idea about art as a sort of a commodity, as a specific object that's sort of fixed. So that would be I guess one to sort of summarize it, that big misconception is that digital art is just NFTs, when actually digital art is something else, something bigger, and actually can look quite different than what the NFT looks like, to the extent that it looks like anything. Because as Eliana pointed out, you can NFT anything. I can make an NFT of my chair, right? So it's also quite silly to talk about NFTs in these sort of blanket terms. Somebody pointed out, I think very smartly, that when we talk about NFTs, we're talking about a technology, a medium, an aesthetic, a community, right? So it's always very helpful to define your terms and talk about what exact aspect you're really trying to have a conversation about.
Oh yes, it's very difficult to reconcile, the market commodity-based perspective with the participatory aesthetics of not only digital art, but all sorts of performance art happenings, things that even existed before that. But Aishura, what are your thoughts on the biggest misconception about NFTs? What are maybe the ones that you've encountered the most?
Well, I think what have been brought so far is incredibly relevant, and I don't want to repeat what has been said, but I guess maybe to in my own perception as an artist, one of the misconceptions, maybe at the more basic level, is that NFTs are these get rich quick scheme stuff, Ponzi scheme things that only monkey pictures get sold for the price of the Lamborghini. And that kind of perception that the general public has kind of hurts my own practice, because NFTs do help these projects to kick off and be bought by people and be incredibly popular. I'm talking about Bored Apes as an example. But on the other hand, it also enables a ton of digital artists like me who are now able to make a living out of our personal work. And sometimes people kind of forget that. But I guess, again, Tina said, is that NFTs is a technology. It's not I don't create, my art is not NFT art. It's digital art, or it's surrealism, or it's, I don't know, portraiture or landscapes. It's not NFT art. And so I think it's important maybe to, for people to understand that there are different niches in that space, like crypto art. I kind of associate myself more to crypto art because I create art, but it is supported by the technology behind crypto and NFTs. So yeah, that would be one of the misconceptions that I've seen around, especially in my family and on Facebook,
Yes, thank you very much, Aifura. So we've been throwing around the word and idea of smart contracts a lot, but maybe Ms. Alvogen, you can help us to elucidate what exactly smart contracts do between the selling and buying parties.
Yeah, they're basically an executable code. So basically, they're not a contract in the legal sense, in the sense that like, I mean, you have two contracting parties, and there's a transaction that happens because of the smart contract, but they're pretty, they're kind of pretty basic. It's like if you imagine a contract that just said, if this happens, you know, if this condition is met, then this will be executed. So in the context of NFT sales, it would be, for example, like if there's an auction, so if by X date, this amount, somebody bids this amount, or, you know, whatever highest amount is bid by a certain time, then the NFT will be sold from person A to B. They don't necessarily, like, to be honest, I don't think that a smart contract, as they're programmed now, as they exist now, that they would really hold up in like a court of law. You know, like, I don't think that if there was some, you know, if somebody purchased an NFT that ended up being linked to a fraudulent work of art, that person would be able to rely on the smart contract as like a source of rights to then sue either the purchaser immediately before them in the line of transactions, or ultimately the artist who minted the NFT off of a fraudulent piece of art. It's that question hasn't really been explored yet, and it's doubtful that a smart contract would be able to resolve some kind of like legal issue between parties.
Speaking of, Aifyora, what is your personal experience of smart contracts, and have you ever encountered legal difficulties that have or have not been resolved by them?
Well, I had never had like difficulties, honestly. I mean, I know there are like fake collections on OpenSea that sell my art and claim like they just called it like A4 in Montreal or something, and that's the title of the collection. I don't know what it stands for, but like fortunately nothing is sold yet. I have to just get in touch with OpenSea and get that sorted out. But yeah, I mean, NFTs are not going to grant you any sort of ownership of copyright or whatever. It's not like if you buy the NFT, you can just make a few t-shirts of them and sell them for $50. That doesn't allow you that at all. And in my case, like, I would say that's like, I never had issues with that. And smart contracts for me, I think are helpful in the sense that, well, before, as an example, I released some collections on Nifty Gateway, and how they work is that they have their custodial platform. And so essentially, if you own pieces on the platform, the pieces are not in your crypto wallet, they're in the company's crypto wallet. And so they take care of it for you. And it's kind of the same if you're an artist and you want to mint some pieces on their platform, they do it for you. So on a provenance standpoint, maybe that the NFTs from Nifty Gateway that are minted by the platform don't have the same appeal as an NFT that is minted through my own crypto address, right? Because the creator of the NFT, at the end of the day, if like all goes bad or whatever, it says Nifty Gateway Omnibus and not Aphoria or my crypto address. So recently I started using my own smart contracts essentially to mint my own work. There's an incredible company called Manifold, and Manifold enables creators to have their own smart contract, and it costs like about $500 and less to deploy it. When I did my own smart contract before they made it public and adjusted everything, it cost like more than $1,000. So now they work incredibly hard to make it more affordable. So essentially what it does is that I mint the tokens myself on their platform, but the address that creates the NFTs is my own address. So this is my digital signature. And so for a buyer who acquires the NFT that I minted myself has maybe more advantage because they know that it came from me and not from a platform. So in the long run, I think this is a step forward for more, I don't know, for a better longevity for those tokens. So for me, that's what it helps for. And platforms like super rare as an example, are also good for that, because as far as I know, when you mint the token on their platform, it comes from your own wallet too. So it's still, at the end of the day, you still have a way to figure out like where does the token come from, and you can prove that, let's say one token is from me and not from a fraudulent person. So they're quite useful for that, yeah.
Dr. Ryan, would you like to talk to us a little bit about, you've mentioned that there were extensive cases of fraud now within, the crypto art sales community, but, as Huai has just told us, there are norms such as this digital signature and others that help prevent this sort of significant copying or just flat out plagiarism within the digital art sphere. But can you maybe talk to us more about these norms, or what insider rules are in place in the community?
Yeah, well, this is one of the central tensions of the NFT space, because the whole point of blockchain technology is supposed to be decentralization. The idea is that we're going to, instead of having, let's say, for example, our monetary system based on these centralized organizations like banks, that require us to sort of trust them. Instead, we're going to have this trustless system where the whole let's say ecosystem is of power is not concentrated, that there are no gatekeepers, that essentially you have this global network of computers who or which are all simultaneously verifying all of the transactions on the blockchain. And so everything is public and everything can be trusted. Now, just because it's public doesn't mean it's you sort of know who you're dealing with, because it's also entirely anonymous, right? So all of the transactions that occur on the blockchain occur between blockchain wallets, and those wallets are anonymous unless you choose to identify, like you can link your blockchain wallet to your Twitter handle, for example, but unless you choose to sort of out yourself or identify, it can be anonymous. And because it's anonymous, that means that it's really ripe for fraud, because anybody, as I said before, can mint an NFT of anything. And you could make, I could make an NFT that points to a particular JPEG file, and so could 20 other people, right? And so the point of weakness in the NFT system is that it's the moment at which the NFT is minted. Once the NFT is minted, you can say that, okay, well, now it's public, it's on the blockchain. You can sort of trace that provenance. You can see all of the sales history. It's entirely public. So what we want to see not happen is people making NFTs of things that aren't theirs. Unfortunately, there's no real way to prevent that. All you can do is rely on the exchanges to basically censor the wallets and to unlist the NFTs. And that requires artists reporting them. So as Euphoria was saying, he's going to report to OpenSea that somebody on OpenSea is pretending to be him and selling NFTs that point to his artworks. But of course, now we are right back to a centralized economy where you're and a trust-based economy where you are relying on a centralized server like OpenSea to become the gatekeeper and to say, well, this is a fraudulent NFT versus this isn't. And so I think if you guys haven't figured out yet, I'm incredibly skeptical about NFTs. And part of it is that, what is the real value add, right? If we're right back to that same situation where, like, as a collector, how do I know that a work of art isn't fraudulent? Well, I go to the gallery, and I go to a gallery that I trust, that has a good reputation. And I say, okay, well, I trust that you have done your homework and can certify to me that this is, or I go to an art appraiser, or, I just go to somebody who's an expert to verify it. And if we're going to OpenSea to verify that the mint is authentic, then we're sort of right back to where we started. So in terms of the other problem with fraud on the blockchain is that it's very hard to combat it, because once that NFT is made, there's no way to delete it unless you have it in your wallet. Like, nobody else can go and delete somebody else's NFT. So it's sort of forever in a sense, to the extent that anything on the blockchain is forever, which is sort of debatable because it depends on how long that blockchain lasts. And there are blockchains that basically have become obsolete. So anyway, So it's a huge problem of people minting NFTs of other people's work. There's not really any way to stop that from happening. It's also very hard to recover things that are stolen is another big problem in this space. So if a work of art is stolen from me, right now here in America, I would go to the FBI and I would report it. And they have an art crimes unit and they would have detectives, and there is a chance of potentially recovering that asset and getting it back. With blockchain, there's really no way to like recover that asset. Like nobody can go and force somebody else's wallet to cough up that NFT and give it back. So that's also another thing. Another thing we're seeing is people holding NFTs for ransom, and basically saying that I am going to destroy your NFT by sending it to, you can sort of burn an NFT, you can sort of take it out of the system. I can't really explain the technology, but anyway, I barely understand the technology behind this part, I'll be totally honest, but it is possible to burn an NFT. So some people are buying NFTs and then telling the artist, well, I'm going to burn it unless you give me a certain amount of money. And, you know, there's a question of like, well, why would an artist pay that? And there's sort of different answers to that, but I see that Alexi has his hand up, so I'll just let him jump in here.
Just to bounce back on what you said, essentially how the burning process works is that as the artist, let's say I mint an NFT and I realize afterwards there's a mistake and I want to redo it again, you have to send it to an address called like a null address. And so essentially, I think it's like 0x00000, and nobody has access to that address. And so once the token is sent to that wallet, no one can retrieve it forever. So it is true, like if you mint something, it is still like, it's going to exist forever. But the least you can do is at least like making sure that no one else can have access to it. And also to counter like these ransom situations that can happen as an artist, you can have some tools to help you out and secure your crypto wallets. And like this is a good example of what you can use. So this is like a hardware wallet. And essentially what it does is that each time you interact with the blockchain, you have to have the physical device to authorize the transactions. So let's say your computer gets hacked and you don't have any of these protection devices. Well, the hacker can access your MetaMask, which is a plugin to interact with the blockchain. They can steal your seed phrase. The seed phrase is like a string of words that is essentially your key, your access to your wallet. So if someone has access to that seed phrase, then your wallet is compromised. So the hacker will access to that seed phrase and then hack your account. But having that seed phrase out of your computer on a physical device helps you just make sure that like no one online can access it and steal your stuff. So as an artist, for me, it's very important to be secure and have those devices, because when I mint a piece, I want to make sure that that address will stay as secure for the longest time, because it's my signature. If I have to start again and have a new address, it adds like some more layers of like complexity to the idea of provenance. So like a friend of mine, his name is Fuck Render, he's an artist and got hacked at some point this summer, and he had to redo everything because his main address got compromised. And since then, he's using one of these devices to be secure. So that's at least one step you can take as a creator to make sure that you're more secure. Of course, there's always a risk, that's for sure.
So essentially when you burn, you're just sending it to an address that you're sending it to a wallet that nobody has access to, right? That's the idea. Yeah.
Yep.
Yes, so fraud of other NFT objects, whether it be crypto artworks or otherwise, is not the only kind of fraud that NFTs have been under speculation for. What are your thoughts on the claims we've been seeing more and more that NFTs are the ideal route to launder money or, circumvent financial, governmental financial institutions, in efforts to commit all kinds of financial crimes. Ms. Albright-Knox. You're muted.
Classic. I mean, yeah, I think it's probably a ripe avenue for that. The like securities regulators, the government institutions haven't quite figured out yet what category to put NFTs into. They want to regulate them as securities, but in a lot of ways, they don't really fit into that category, which we can talk about a bit later. But there's a lot of, if it isn't obvious, there is a lot of risk involved, and there is a lot of way to, these are obvious ways to funnel assets in, not hidden channels, because it is a public ledger, but it is anonymous, so I'm not like an expert in white collar crime, but I think that there's obvious avenues for this, and government authorities don't know yet how, or haven't quite figured out how to regulate it. But in terms of securities fraud, what I find interesting, and like there is this, I think, tension between wanting to call NFTs securities versus what they actually are, because a security in itself is fungible. It can be exchanged, like it doesn't have a uniqueness to it. It can, so a security, whether it's equity, a stock or debt, those are interchangeable amongst themselves, not equity and debt, but forms of equity amongst themselves and other forms of debt amongst themselves. Whereas an NFT by its definition is non-fungible. It's a unique token that can't ever interchange with another token. So in that way, they don't act as securities, but in some ways they do. And this is where, we're just starting to see this, where NFTs are being used as forms of co-property. And so, for example, multiple people could own shares in a single work of art or in a single asset that is represented by an NFT. And in that way, people can then use their share as collateral, loan it out, so use it as equity to basically convert their NFT into more liquid assets. So in that way, they could act as securities. So I mean, the short answer is that there are lots of possibilities, I think, to use NFTs and blockchain as a way to launder money, but I can't say specifically how. And I think basically at this point, the government regulators haven't quite figured out yet, like what category to put it in.
Yeah, so as a follow-up, yes, they're very difficult to define, but are there any governmental regulations at this point that can be or have been applied to NFTs at all?
Certainly, yes. I mean, I know that some exchanges are subject to regulation, but again, like it's not so clear cut. Like it's not like, for example, if let's say they're going to be publicly traded, well, then you're automatically subject to that form of regulation. But most exchanges aren't like they're private platforms, right? So in that way, they escape that form of regulation.
I will say that there's like a sort of rising spate of governments thinking about how to regulate, how to tax these transactions as well. I think one of the highest profile is that I forget if it was last year, the beginning of this year, because everything blends together, but China has cracked down on the mining and trading of cryptocurrency. And so what that looks like takes different forms. You can essentially cut it off at the source by cutting off access to the energy grid at these mining farms. So people basically create these, there are special computers called miners that the whole reason they exist is to mine currency on the blockchain, which they do by completing sort of the cryptographic puzzles. And then for that, they're rewarded, or for like verifying information the blocks of data on the blockchain, they're rewarded with cryptocurrency essentially. So people are it's a way of transforming energy into cryptocurrency. And so you can sort of not give people access to energy. You can not allow financial institutions to accept cryptocurrency or trade cryptocurrencies. So yeah, there's, I mean, it's going to be very interesting in the next year or two to see how this all plays out, where on the one hand, you have stories like, you know, in Eastern Europe or in China, people cutting off access to the energy grid. But on the other hand, now it's like, you know, Venmo takes crypto or something, you know, it's like there's this push to legitimate and to normalize and to accept. And on the other hand, this push to regulate. And so I honestly don't know what direction it's moving in. We'll see. I think the fact that the market has tanked will definitely impact what happens in the future. I think people recognizing the volatility of the value of this will put a little damper. Like, I don't know if you guys heard, but the new mayor of New York City said that he wanted to receive his salary in crypto, which turned out to be a really stupid idea now that crypto is down like 50%, most of the major currencies. So.
Well, so on this question of value, thank you, Dr. Ryan, because you've perfectly led up to my next question. So you've expressed your skeptical perspective on the value of NFTs, but we see more and more mainstream art institutions like Sotheby's and Christie's having crypto art auctions. How has the emergence of NFTs altered, increased or decreased the values of perceptions we have of digital and especially crypto art within mainstream art market circuits of exchange?
So as I keep trying to remind people, the art world and the art market are two different things. The art market is a subset of the art world, but the art world is a lot bigger than the art market. And I say that because a lot of people keep pointing to the auctions that have happened at mainstream auction houses like Christie's and Sotheby's as evidence of some type of like mainstream acceptance or interest. And I think people just need to understand that fundamentally those are businesses that have been very eager to get into what are called primary sales for a long time. They're primary sales, meaning, you know, not just reselling objects on the secondary market, but, you know, selling new works of art. And the other thing is that if you think about what these exchanges, these crypto exchanges do, they're basically for online auctions. I mean, they do outright sales as well, but a lot of them got really popular for conducting online auctions of works of art. So in a sense, the auction houses of the traditional art world, they're the ones who are most threatened by the emergence of this new system. So yeah, so just to say that, you know, that we can talk about the art market and what the art market is doing with NFTs, but that's not the totality of the picture. I think that for those of us who are interested in digital art, it is our business to always be looking to see what artists are doing. And there are a lot of interesting artists who are actually making art on the blockchain. There are lots of interesting artists who happen to be selling their work, at least selling NFTs of their work. But at the end of the day, you know, what I think most people in the larger art world are interested in is the art itself and the ideas of the art and the aesthetics of the art. And whether or not the work happens to have been minted as an NFT is kind of irrelevant to that conversation. So I wouldn't not buy something because it has been minted, but I also wouldn't buy something because it has been minted, right? Like it doesn't, like the fact that it's an NFT is sort of immaterial in some sense, except for the case of like conceptual blockchain-based art, which is a very small subset of things. As I keep on saying, you know, basically the NFT is neither necessary nor sufficient for it to be interesting or for me to actually be able to acquire it.
Okay, well, that's very interesting. Euphoria, earlier you were saying how the reputations that NFTs have today kind of negatively have the potential to negatively impact your work and artistic practice because of the idea that they're just a speculative frenzy sort of to make money. Do you want to maybe answer this question about how digital art's value, the perception of it has changed?
Can you reformulate the question? I'm not sure I totally grasp it. I'm sorry.
Oh, absolutely. My apologies. So how has the emergence of NFTs changed the perception of digital art? Like,
Mm.
how did we view digital art before, when it wasn't sold as an NFT, or, when it was just commissioned versus when it's minted as an NFT?
Yeah. Well, I'm just one person. I'm like, my own experience is totally unique, and of course a lot of people experience the same, but like it's different for everyone else. And also, as Tina said, like there's a lot of forms, like different shapes that digital art can be. My art is kind of like, I guess maybe could fall into like the category of like fine art, but it's not fine art, it's different, but there are unique pieces. I create a piece and that's it. It's either an animation or still. It's not like an experience on chain or a website. It could be, but I mean, so far it's been like unique creation. So for me, the only thing I would get from my digital art online was likes and comments on Instagram. Like, except for like licensing my work or doing commissions, as I said, that was the only kind of feedback or return I would get. Of course, indirectly, having an audience on Instagram and on social media and likes and comments really helped me make a name for myself, and of course, like get more clients and all that stuff. But like never before I was able to sell my digital art to someone else, because like it wasn't really possible. I could send anyone here a JPEG of an image, and you guys could send it to everyone else, and that would be it. Like, it's very hard to contain. Like, I could sell wallpapers for $1, but you could also screenshot it on my website and use it by yourself and just make your wallpaper yourself. And so I guess like NFTs just make this idea that like digital art can also have this scarcity in some situations, because my work, like if it can be scarce in some sort of way, it's good for me, because it's not like an experience that everybody can participate in. It's very personal. It's an expression of myself, and so I think it makes sense for that. And also, I think when it's not related really to the question, but one thing that's kind of interesting about all this is that because the certificate is digital and accessible digitally, and that the image can be seen by anybody, I think it kind of is like can be a catalyst for like a more widespread like recognition of an artist's work. Like, let's say an artist creates a piece, a painting, and spent ages creating it, and then it's sold to a collector, and that collector hides it in some sort of basement because it's like some sort of asset, and it never sees the light of day ever. Well, the piece could be seen online, but it wouldn't be the actual thing. As for a digital piece of art, well, if you're viewing it on a browser and a computer, you're actually seeing the right thing. You're seeing my piece as it should be digitally. And so it enables me to like if more people are able to see it, then more people can be aware of that piece. And therefore, ultimately, there's out there an NFT that can prove that like someone owns the token associated to that piece that gets like more eyes on it, and so on. So it's like, for me as a digital artist, that's what makes the most sense. Like, I don't see any really other alternative. Maybe prints again, but that doesn't really bring anything for me. So I guess that all I gotta say is that for some particular cases, like for digital artists like me, like NFTs are kind of like the answer for us to be actually able to monetize our pieces, because before we couldn't really. So yeah.
Well, one thing that's interesting that's coming out of the NFT space, and regardless of what you think of the aesthetics, the sort of general aesthetics that are coming out of the NFT art space, I also hesitate to use the term NFT art, because I don't think, aside from a few examples, and Tina, you named one earlier, there's also, you must be familiar with Bitcoin, Sarah Mayohas. So that's those are good examples of artists, conceptual artists, who are using the technology, the medium of blockchain, and NFTs to create their art. But, you know, aside from those few artists, like there is this sort of emerging sort of aesthetic trend that we're seeing coming out of this space. And regardless of what you think of that aesthetic, what's, I think, fundamentally interesting, or what's going to be maybe the takeaway in a couple of years, is the community that's emerging from it. This idea that, like, okay, so there's these alternative channels that are being created, like all the NFT artists are on Discord, for example, or like what's the community, like, yeah, the community of thought that's emerging out of that, and what people are starting to use and experiment with in the NFT space. And like more and more there's this idea of like breaking down, for example, some underlying artworks and storing them as individual components on the blockchain, because that's another aspect that we really didn't get into. But the underlying assets, the files themselves, like an image, a JPEG, is too big to store directly on the blockchain, which is how NFTs, you know, emerged to begin with. Was like a stand-in to redirect, as like a URL basically, to redirect people to the images or the works themselves. And so what's starting to emerge is people are kind of like splintering the underlying art assets, storing them on the blockchain, trading them. Anyway, so there's this like interesting idea of community that's evolving out of it. And I think for me, that's going to be interesting to see how that evolves, more so than this idea that there's going to be some like new form of digital art that we're going to call NFT art in, you know, 20 years from now or 10 years from now.
Yes, so on this aesthetic that you're talking about, this trending aesthetic, something that I've noticed is that there a big component and characteristic of this aesthetic is the very almost, you know, video game, very computer. You see the digital trace of the image. Dr. Ryan, you know, in what are the art historical implications of this in a field that has been since the Renaissance defined by the idea of a singular artistic genius, you know, virtuosity, when the artist is in fact the computer, or, you know, the AI algorithm that is generating, you know, $1 million selling artworks like CryptoPunks?
Yeah, well, there's a couple of different layers to this, right? So first of all, a lot of the images that you see that look very like digital are in fact completely artisanal or like handmade. They're made by artists who are usually professional graphic designers or illustrators, and who have a kind of personal obsession with the visual language of digital technology. And there's also a lot of nostalgia for computer graphics and the history of computer graphics from their own childhoods, right? So there's a whole bunch of images that look like sort of arcade games. There's a vogue for 8-bit graphics from the sort of 70s and 80s. There's a vogue for low poly graphics from the 1990s, back when, you know, video games were, you know, not quite as, we didn't quite have the computing power to smooth contours in real time. So you wind up with, you know, the basic polygon armature of people's bodies being more apparent. Very famously, Lara Croft's breasts used to be very like faceted, and now they're much smoother. So we see this vogue for these sort of like older styles of computer graphics. So that's one thing. And that, you know, really, I mean, these sort of like JPEGs of like, you know, sort of like brightly colored, you know, 8-bit stuff or whatever, you know, it's like, it is what it is. So on another level though, you're talking about, you know, artists who are actually using generative processes, who are using algorithms, and that can take the form of, well, it can take a lot of forms, right? So it can be a work that's made in collaboration with machine learning, also known as artificial intelligence, where you are basically training a program with a huge data set of images to, and then asking it to sort of create new output, to sort of hallucinate, right? Anadol uses the word machine hallucinations, to sort of hallucinate a new image. But that has nothing to do with NFTs, actually. AI generated art has, really sort of first got popular, again, around 2014, 15, 16. So artists have been sort of experimenting with that for a while, and is, again, nothing to do with NFTs. You're just using an NFT to financialize, to sort of tokenize the output. There are other artists who, have been thinking about making on-chain generative art, most famously the platform Artblocks was sort of the first platform to really popularize the idea of making on-chain generative art, where essentially you are using the process of minting itself to influence certain variables that will affect the output of the work of art. And so what happens with Artblocks is that you actually can't buy a finished work of art, a finished image. You mint your token, and then in the process of that work, of that transaction happening, the image is generated, right? So in the process of buying, so it's I think of it as sort of like almost like gambling, where you're like, at a slot machine or something, where you're just like asking this process to be executed, and then like keeping your fingers crossed that you're going to get like a nice output that you like. And there'd be different variables in terms of colors or different shapes, and all of that is controlled by the system that the artist creates. So I just want to say that in terms of that, of like algorithmically generating art, that's not new. And it's not even intrinsically digital. So, people often invoke an artist like Saul LeWitt, who would similarly sort of set up parameters for a work of art to be executed. So I think that these are completely valid as far as artistic processes go. I think that it does beg the question of like, how do we evaluate the aesthetic value of something that is in part generated by chance? But if anybody's familiar with the work of John Cage or Robert Rauschenberg, for example, artists have been bringing in chance-based processes into art for a long time. And so we can talk about the aesthetic of chance itself as being beautiful, as being like nature. We can talk about the system itself that the artist sets up as being the work of art. We can talk about individual outputs as being themselves aesthetically interesting, even though they were created by chance. So I still think we can talk about aesthetics, and there's even some people who say that code itself is an aesthetic form, and we can talk about the programming itself as being sort of like this artisanal programming that's done, whether it's through processing, which is sort of one of the most popular software programs for artists to make visual art, or some other code, esoteric languages, ESOLangs. People think of those as works of art when they're creating their own sort of like handmade code. So, all of this is encompassed within the field of digital art, right? And I think is hopefully, and if anything, NFTs might open people's eyes to the possibilities there. I would hope. I hope that answered your question. I think I lost the plot a little bit because I got so excited talking about code as art.
Thank you very much, Tina. I think the traditional art historical model in general, like me being an art history student, it is so limiting what the university teaches us sometimes. And it's very great how much technology can open our horizons to new possibilities for aesthetic development. This is a question for all of you. In the face of all the criticism and speculation and debate around NFTs today, that they're just a speculative frenzy, that, they're a bubble about to burst. I mean, we've just seen the price of crypto fall, or, just another way to facilitate financial crime. But do you believe that NFTs are here to stay, or are they going to die down sometime in the future? Beginning with Aifura.
Well, I think the like, at least for me and for people like me, like, I don't think they're going away. Like, this is something that really changes the game for us. And so I feel like as long as people are interested, like, I guess, like, I have no control of the market, obviously. And so as long as there's interest in like people owning NFTs of digital art created by digital artists, I think this is still going to be a thing. As far as like the craze for profile picture NFTs and all of that, I don't know. That is the most, like, this is like the more speculative part of NFTs, that, of course, we could see shift in the next year or two or whatever. Maybe it could be something incredibly more valuable if the metaverse becomes an actual thing in the futures in the next 10 years. I don't know. So it's kind of hard to tell right now. I think that right now NFTs are kind of linked to the crypto markets, and so they're as volatile as crypto. And as long as it's not like properly adopted and the onboarding process is not, like the onboarding process right now is kind of difficult for some. So as long as we have these issues still, it's still going to take some time before we see a permanent, like, I don't know, ça va prendre du temps avant que ça devienne quelque chose de très permanent en soi. So I don't know. For me, I see it as like positively. I think this is something that 10 years on, we'll still talk about it. It's still going to exist, and it's going to be even more accessible and easy to understand. And we might not even notice like the blockchain aspect of it. It might become as easy to use as Facebook and Instagram are right now. So yeah, that's my point of view. But of course, I can be proven wrong. We'll see.
Ms. Alvogan?
I think they're probably here to stay. I think we're just beginning to see the different use cases for NFTs. I think, like, I get calls weekly from people who are like, I have this idea to convert XYZ into an NFT and I want to patent it. And I'm like, okay, well, let's think about this a little bit more. You know, does this actually exist already? Are you just like, is this really necessary what you're proposing to do? Or are you just, you know, using an NFT as a sort of like, yeah, like a sort of nifty trick to do something that, yeah, that already exists. But that being said, every now and then I do hear a really good idea and I'm like, oh, I'd never thought of that before. And that's kind of interesting, you know? And so, and I don't quite, you know, sometimes it's hard. I have a hard time wrapping my head around, like, it's interesting, but is it really useful? Or it's maybe I'm just not quite understanding it. Maybe I'm not quite understanding the technology behind it, or, you know, so I do think that we're just starting to see the potential, and we haven't yet thought of all of the use cases for NFTs, and that will probably become apparent as time goes by. And I mean, you know, for better or for worse, like, crypto's been around for over 10 years. So I think I remember like about 10 years ago, my partner was like, oh, I'm gonna start mining crypto. And I was like, what the hell are you talking about? You know, and he had his little like setup in our basement, and with like a computer that was literally seemed like it was going to catch fire any minute. But and it's still here, you know, and it's volatile, that's for sure, but it keeps going up and then it goes back down and goes back up. So, you know, I don't know, like, I'm not a financial markets expert, so I can't say like what are the long-term trends and will it stabilize at some point. I don't know that, but I do think that probably NFTs are here to stay, at least in the short kind of medium term.
Dr. Ryan?
Yeah, kind of agree with a lot that's been said. I think even people who are very committed to the NFT space are welcoming the crash, because there's a certain hope that it's going to clear out a lot of the speculators, that people who aren't really serious about digital art, who aren't really serious about collecting digital art, who simply are opportunists who heard that there's some money to be made very quickly in this space. Once there's no money to be made, I mean, it'll be terrible, obviously, for a lot of people, but meaning mostly artists who are hoping to be able to make some money. And I'm a big supporter of artists making money. And I think, if anything, you know, the popularity of NFTs among artists is a real indictment of the art world, that we haven't created better, more viable financial futures and opportunities for artists, you know, in a rich ecosystem. But anyway, I think I hope that happens in a sense, because right now, you know, NFTs are completely dogged by you know, just like the rampant speculation and fraud that's happening. So, and just attracting a lot of people who are not very good artists, frankly. So hopefully some of that will clear out and settle down. And
we're not artists at all.
Yeah. Well, I mean, but it's
Nothing to
also,
fight
I mean,
with.
but to be fair, it's like not all NFTs are even trying to be art. Like, I mean,
No.
I use the term digital collectible, right, to encompass, you know, because it's like, you know, the NBA is also making NFTs. Like there's music NFTs, there's a lot of things there. There's fashion NFTs. But at least, you know, of, let's say, you know, images, or even conceptual projects, right? It's like, I'm only really concerned with that part of that corner of it, right, with the visual arts. So I think a lot of, you know, people might feel a burn financially, but if you are buying art as an investment, you just made your bed, you know. And nobody, I mean, I've always said, you know, like, I mean, it's very recent that that art has started to outperform like the S&P 500 as an investment, but it's extremely volatile. That's like on average, and within that, it's extremely volatile, and it's very, very hard to guarantee or even to make an educated guess about which artists are going to have a good financial return on your investment. So I always say, you know, you don't buy art as an investment. You buy art because you love it and you want to live with it. And even if it went to nothing, you would still be glad that you have it and that you supported the artist, right, by giving them that money. And you never spend more than you can afford to basically lose, right? I mean, you know, just assume that that money's gone instantly. So anyway, will NFTs have a use outside of the speculative market? I mean, there's some potential use cases. I'm still not completely convinced. I think right now, the only thing they're good at is for facilitating the transfer of funds. And I would like us to see a more robust digital art market after this that has nothing to do with NFTs. But I do think it's quite possible that NFTs, as Euphoria was saying, will sort of become a kind of back-end architecture that people will not even interact with on the front end. So for example, when the platform File first launched, the transactions, you would go to File's website and you would buy a digital work of art that was editioned, and you were actually acquiring ownership over that edition. And there's like documents and certificates that came packaged with the work of art. It's like very professionally done by people who actually know what they're doing from the art world. But you would never know that it had anything to do with blockchain. It's like you enter your credit card information, the prices are listed in USD, you get a certificate of authenticity. It was just that the transactions happened to be registered on Bitmark on the back end, but you would never know that. Like you didn't need a crypto wallet to buy an edition work of digital art. And so now they've had to embrace, you know, sales and cryptocurrency and listing prices and all of that, because that's where the money is, right? That's where the collectors are. It's what they want. But I'm hoping that in the future, you know, perhaps NFTs will be useful sort of on the back end, but you know, not necessarily so much on the front end, because I do think that it shifts the conversation from being about the art to being about the asset, which means that we're talking about money instead of aesthetics. And that's just a conversation that I'm like, obviously they're in bed together. Like, obviously I get to do what I do because people have decided that art is worth money, but foregrounding that conversation is just not, you know, I work at a nonprofit art museum. I don't work on the for-profit side of things. So there's just not the conversations that I want to have. I'm being very selfish here.
No, yes, absolutely. It's a very fair comment to make that the criticisms that we often see leveled towards NFTs are not criticisms from which the traditional art market is at all immune. I mean, you know, people saying that people just buy overpriced old master paintings to funnel money into those assets is, you know, as old as the auction houses themselves. So I'm going
Absolutely. But can I just say, because I hear that a lot, and, you know, people are always like, well, you're just being a hypocrite because the traditional art world also has like money laundering and all these things. I was like, yes, but I didn't like it when we did it either. Like, why should we double down on that? Right. Yeah. Like that happens, tax evasion, all of that fraud, it happens, but like, that doesn't mean it's a good thing or that we should like support a system that just continues to do that, right? Let's have like a third way. So.
Oh yes, exactly.
Sorry.
No, thank you for pointing that out. So I'm going to end the recording now after giving the blurbs of our organizations. So this was an event co-hosted by the McGill Art Law Association. The McGill Art Law Association is a forum for McGill students interested in the intersection of arts, law, and culture to promote the awareness of the discipline of art law within the McGill Faculty of Law and beyond. And the Cheng Art and Culture Association is a Montreal-based nonprofit which aims to support emerging and interdisciplinary practices across the field of art, technology, and entrepreneurship in response to the changing nature of aesthetics. If you enjoyed this event, please stay tuned to the MoMA and Cheng pages for upcoming events that might interest you as well. So I will end the recording now and begin taking audience questions.